Hello, all, and welcome to my commentary series, which will correspond with the audiobook series. I'll be going chapter by chapter to give some additional thoughts and elaboration on the topics discussed in each chapter. This series is going to be a little bit more free-form, so please forgive any pauses, coughs, clearing of the throat, or anything else like that. Here we're going to be more just elaborating upon the chapters and making comments as we go. So, with that out of the way, let's start with the first chapter, the Suicidal Millennials Guidebook. Now, this chapter is definitely an interesting topic because originally it was actually not even included with the book. Then, when it was added, it was going to be at the end of the book. But after a lot of consideration, I decided to move it to the beginning. And the reasoning for this is that originally the book was actually over 300 pages and included a lot more additional details about my life and my personal struggle with mental illness. That was part of the reason I chose the title. Another reason I chose the title is just because the book is kind of a variety book. If you've read it, it goes through a lot of different topics and different subjects. It's not so easy to kind of pinpoint, a specific thing about it that can encapsulate the entire book, somewhat cleanly. And this was a way to sort of, put mental health at the forefront of the conversation, put mental health in front of a lot of people, and also kind of, try to, impact people a bit heavily with the title. Like, I understand that the title's controversial, and I do want people to feel that a little bit, feel that heat, of not knowing what to think about something. And this is pressure that those with mental illness are feeling all of the time. For one reason or another. And so I kind of wanted to have the title be a little bit of a shock to the system and sort of, inspire a little bit of thought, inspire a little bit of an emotional reaction, whether that's positive or negative. Originally, I think you could argue the title was more appropriate when I talked more about my own mental illness. But again, I am going to save that for another writing project that I'm planning in the future. But at this point, I thought it was, pertinent because of that. Because I had removed those sections of the book, I added this section to the end, and then I rearranged it to put it at the beginning just to kind of get the title out of the way, in a way. Not get it out of the way, but sort of explain it in a short, succinct way that would sort of be able to enable the book to move on without the reader being, thinking the entire time, why is this the name of the book? The book doesn't talk about suicide that much. The book doesn't talk about mental illness maybe as much as I thought it would. So kind of putting all those things together, this is why I put the first chapter where it is, and that's why we start the book off that way. In addition, I wanted to explain a little bit of what the title's referring to. I think there was a large, when I've spoken to other people, there's a lot of people that seem to think the title is saying this is a guidebook for suicidal millennials. That is not my intention, although I do think that there are things within the book that could help individuals with mental illness kind of formulate their thoughts on what's happening and sort of try to take pressure off of themselves, stop judging themselves, all these kinds of things. But at the same time, the title is not referring to others, it's referring to myself. In the context of the title, I am the suicidal millennial, and this is my guidebook. So yes, at the end of the day, this is a project I've wanted to do my entire life. When I began the project and was in the midst of it, honestly, I was at such a poor state of mental health at that point that I really couldn't imagine myself surviving much longer. not that I was having suicidal thoughts at the time, which is something that, I've had maybe on and off for the past 4 years or so, but it was more like I felt so much mental pressure and anguish that I thought that I might simply perish out of nowhere. Like, I really thought, on an emotional level, not on a logical level. Obviously, logically, we all understand, there's a purpose and a reason why individuals die. You don't normally just die out of nowhere. But I really felt in those moments emotionally that I would simply drop dead because of the strength and power of the mental anguish that I was going through, which was really the spark that created the project in the first place. Because in those dark days, dark moments, realistically, I couldn't imagine my life continuing on for much longer. This was always something that I'd wanted to do. I always wanted to find a way to share some of the information that I'd learned, growing up, and the information that I'd found out over time. And that was the real kind of thing that kicked the whole project off. That was the why now question was kind of answered by, well, I really can't imagine going on for much longer, so I at least I want to do this one thing that I really had wanted to do for a long time. And I'm really happy I was able to finish the project. I'm hoping that some people like it. I know that some people like it already, but I'm hoping that it can inspire thought and conversation. If individuals are offended by it, which I understand, I'm hoping that they can approach it with an open mind, approach it without judgment, understand that the things I talk about, I'm not trying to impose my judgment onto those things necessarily, but I'm simply trying to present a certain reality, present a certain truth that I've discovered, whether that's true or not, whether that's actually, when I say whether that's true, I mean whether that corresponds to actual reality or not. It's difficult to say. It's anybody's guess. But at the same time, I'm hoping that if you do believe it corresponds with reality, I'm hoping it can illuminate certain things that maybe you hadn't thought of before. If you don't believe it corresponds with the reality, I'm hoping that it can serve as a way for you to strengthen your own position. How can you logically debunk all of the things I'm saying in a topic you disagree with? If you can't, I think that's something to reflect upon. If you can, that should only serve to strengthen your own personal resolve and assist you in, let's say, a logical debate about the subject. The next time you'll kind of have, different things you looked at and different things you'll be able to counter in that conversation. Now, arguments and conversations, it's not all about winning. When I was younger, it was about, well, you want to win the argument. But, really it's about the sharing of truth and reality. If you go into an argument like it's a battle, you can always find a way to win. But whether that's plausible in terms of actual reality or whether you're just using words to kind of, create an artificial victory, it's hard to tell. The true purpose of a conversation and debate, in my opinion, from a productive standpoint, is to share information and to kind of, strengthen your own resolve, or if the information coming in is new and is challenging certain things, it's to help you change your mind and get a better picture of reality and be able to understand things better. So, at the end of the day, I'm happy that I made this the title. I'm definitely satisfied with it. I think the part "start the conversation" is also a really important piece of the whole thing. Like, we don't speak enough. Children are not taught philosophy in schools. You may be taught religion, which presents a certain understanding of the way you should live your life and what your goals should be, which is good. That's, it's fine. I think I'll talk a lot more about religion in a different context, but I think it's also really important for children to be taught philosophy, because without that, there's no inherent understanding of what the purpose of your life is and what your goals should actually be. Why are we here? What are we doing? Why are we running around and working all day? Why are we, doing all the number of different things that our society does and that we as individuals are compelled to do? Why do we want to do those things? To understand that, you have to look into the past, both recent and, ancient. And basically, within this whole concept, it's not that I think any individual philosophy just tells you the truth or tells you, absolute truth. That's the thing. Absolute truth, and this is something I tried to get across in the book, it's complex to the point of madness. It's, when you understand, you can look at a circle drawn on a piece of paper and it looks like a perfect circle. But if you zoom in down to microscopic levels, the edge of the line is like a mountain range of inconsistency. Things are only perfect, can only exist in perfection within our mind. Everything in reality is extremely complex, imperfect, and has a million little nooks and crannies of understanding that is difficult to achieve. It's almost impossible for a person to have a full understanding of any topic, never mind all topics at once. And given that kind of situation, I think this is where philosophy is very helpful, because philosophy allows for the ordering and the contextualization of information in a way that's non-scientific, but is somewhat scientific. Science is science because it can be supported by evidence and data. Philosophy is almost like science, but you don't need the data. You don't need to prove that what you're saying is necessarily true, because a lot of times what you're talking about is unprovable. But it's still meant to provide some kind of value in terms of a certain contextualization, a certain understanding. I think if our citizens were well versed in different philosophies, I think our political landscape would be a lot healthier and would be more open to discussing new ideas and topics, as opposed to now where there's a kind of war about language and certain things. If I say something in a certain political context in a certain way, the other side that doesn't agree with that has just canned responses that are things they say all the time. But within that response, whether it's a true response or not, or whether it's simply just a thing that you say to change the topic because you bring something else in, I think a lot of these things are more linguistic tricks than actual conversations. There's not a conversation being had. There's just different languages that are used to support different ideas being yelled at each other. And this comes back to, what is the true nature of a conversation? It's to share information. It's not to, win the argument or whatever. That's more akin to a battle, a war, a fight. It's more akin to that. A conversation is a way to enlighten yourself. You can learn things from somebody else that took them years to understand in a second. At the same time, conversations, people can tell you misconceptions, people can tell you lies, and you have to kind of be able to sort through all that as well and kind of integrate things into your own mental understanding as you see fit. Anyways, I've been going on way too long about a bunch of different topics here, but in any case, the whole start the conversation piece was meant to inspire philosophical conversations, which realistically I want to turn into political conversations. Because politics, as much as it's reviled, as much as I revile it, many other people have a large disdain for it, as it's become, you have people in politics who are just there to make money, to accept money from large entities, and then to do what those entities say. And then you have people in there who are actually fighting for ideological values, and you have everything in between. People who care about certain ideological things but will accept some money and don't care about other things. And this is kind of why the entire system is not functioning, because you have certain people who, and even within the ideological side, there are some that are willing to compromise the ideologies and there are some that aren't. And what kind of action does that create? At the end of the day, politics, the political system, regardless of what it is, the result of it is the rules and guidelines by which we all live our lives. Now, that is incredibly important. It literally determines, the government has made entire industries wealthy or not wealthy. It's, erased businesses or lifted them from nothing. At the same time as business and corporations are a massive force in our society, they have a clear objective. Even if that objective, as spoken about later in the book, creates pain and suffering and issues, it's very predictable how that would occur. It's because they're all trying to do the same thing at the same time, which is increase the value of the business, increase the value, given to the shareholders. That common thread, makes businesses extremely predictable in their actions. And a lot of the negative consequences that have occurred from this, have been addressed in different times by different governmental policies, or have been not addressed, in current times when businesses have been using their monetary power to change the system to benefit them, basically. So without Americans having a political understanding and being involved, there's no way that we can change the rules to something more democratic, change the rules to something that creates outcomes that we actually enjoy, versus creating outcomes which are not enjoyable, which are creating problems and issues that are unnecessary and redundant and, just unintelligent, responses to what's occurring, which is kind of what's been happening with the government and politics. It all comes back to understanding of the political system, but at the same time, it's about having conversations within our lives to sway the people around us that we can. There are people sometimes, especially nowadays with this breadth of information that exists, there are people living in different worlds, different universes of information. And when you can speak with them sometimes, if somebody lives in a different informational reality than you, there's very little relatability between you. And so it's important to, one, this is the danger of misinformation and what's been created. Information does not come from consolidated sources anymore. It's the same kind of insane, multiplicity of information that you would have been able to receive in older periods of history, but it's multiplied because the internet allows that information to be delivered from almost anywhere, which is absolutely insane. But again, this is the state of business. When something is going to benefit business, a la the internet, will be beneficial to sell technological devices that connect to the internet, to create commerce through the internet. It is shepherded into the fold without any kind of reservation. We are the test subjects of the internet. this entire generation and even past generations. We are all the guinea pigs for what is the internet going to do to our mind? What is it going to do to our society? What is it going to do to our health? All of these things are questions that remain unanswered. And similarly to the cigarette, initial outcome of cigarettes, when something benefits business, we charge in first, head first. You had doctors recommending certain brands of cigarettes for their health benefits. And then it takes the death of, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people to cause a change later on. Our society is extremely retroactive in the way that we change things. We kind of wait for something to fall apart and for things to get awful before we change something, because we have no concept of foresight. There's no, when things are involved that benefit large businesses, there will be no foresight. They will be shepherded into the fold, and then the result, is the result. So, either way, this is why we have to have these conversations, because creating some kind of congruent sense of things that we value democratically is so important. And I would say to any of you who are trying to start political conversations with people in your lives, stay away from the traditional language of politics. Do not talk about things on a high level. Talk about things on a lower level in your lives. When these big nebulous concepts are brought into the fold, freedom, equity, these kinds of things, oftentimes you lose sight of what you're actually talking about, which is basic, practical things that affect our lives every day. There, by some method, and I don't know how this has occurred, freedom has been heralded as an unequivocal great thing that should be pursued always, when in reality, everyone, you can think about it for 2 seconds. There's certain freedoms we just should not have. Everyone on the earth could have the freedom to launch a nuclear warhead. How long do you think it would take before a nuclear holocaust occurs? I mean, literally, it would be the first day with everyone with access to launch a nuclear warhead. Somebody would get mad about something insignificant and they would do it, even though it makes no sense. But this just gets back to, there's certain freedoms that are incredible, like, freedom to pursue things that you want in life that don't harm other people, having free time to spend with your family, freedom to not be locked into a single profession and stuff like that. There are freedoms that are great, but freedom is not unequivocally great. Now, this is a very nuanced conversation, and a lot of people don't quite, it doesn't, you don't get to that point in a conversation like this. Normally. So I find when you're speaking about politics, it's better to go, especially if you have a philosophical inclination like myself, it's better to go like off-roading as opposed to on the established roads and paths. When you're on the established roads and paths, like I said before with canned responses, there are certain things certain phrases people will pull out that's just expected to win them that side of the argument or win them on a certain point of the argument. I've had times in my life where I varied wildly politically, left, right, center, everything. I've been there. So I understand how this kind of, political argument can be very, it can be very combative, and that's not a great place to foster information. But when you take someone off of the standard, call and response style, I say, pro-choice, you say pro-life. Like, that's just not, you're not having a conversation there. It's just a disagreement happening. It's like if I say yes and you say no, that's, there's no conversing occurring. So talk about actual facets of what's happening. Make comparisons across disciplines. these types of things can open up people's minds to new ideas because it gets you off the standard rigmarole of, the normal process of how that conversation goes, where we both walk away disagreeing and unhappy and nobody learned anything. That is completely useless. To have a conversation, there has to be some level of buy-in. And by buy-in, I mean you have to risk something. You have to tell someone something. And oftentimes online is not the best place to have these conversations. I'm going to make videos in the future detailing why I think the comment section online is a very poor place to have a conversation for a lot of different levels. But when you're having conversations with people in your daily lives, that's when you have a chance to really relate to somebody. You have a chance to, you have to, nothing wagered, nothing gained, even in a conversation. You might have to, admit something or share a little piece of information that maybe you normally wouldn't to see if you can get that person to relate to you or to understand you on that certain level. And I find all this happens best when you approach the situation with understanding, where you hold your judgments, you reserve your judgments. People think these things. Nobody wants to walk around all day wrong. There's a reason people think the things that they do, even if they're completely disconnected from reality. Like, there's a reason for that, and it might not be their fault. And even if it is their fault, they're just trying to live their life as best they can. So when you keep that in mind, go off the tracks of normal conversation, I think that's how we can really have great political, philosophical conversations. And it doesn't work all the time. And when sometimes you put yourself out there in a conversation and you get, rejected, the other person doesn't want to have a conversation. They're, in fight mode, they're in argument mode, and they're just going full defensive. And, and sometimes, you can't just, not everyone has the ability to change their mind or willing to change their mind. I find it's best to focus on those who understand the true nature of conversation, who are willing to change their mind. There's no point in starting a conversation with someone that won't change their mind unless you want to learn something from them, because maybe they could tell you something that they know. But if you want to have a legitimate conversation where ideas are furthered and ideas are developed and a person is unwilling to change their mind about anything, it's just not worth it a lot of times to have that conversation, as unfortunate as it is. Because I know there are people who have family members who ideologically have massive issues with them and they're unable to reach any kind of compromise. And that, has to be extremely emotionally painful on a lot of levels. Even though personally I haven't experienced that too much, I've been very, very fortunate that the older individuals in my life, my family members, have had the ability to change their mind about certain things and kind of grow as things go on and react to information. There's a certain perception that the reaction to information is weak, like makes you weak because you had to change your mind. I think it's very weak, telling, foolish to be unable to change your mind. I mean, point me to the person who knows everything and I'll show you the biggest fool out there. I mean, honestly, it's, there's a curve of learning. I forget the exact name of it, but I'm sure some of you will be familiar. There's a concept where if you learn a very small thing about a discipline, you all of a sudden get the perception that you know everything about it. But once you learn a little bit more, like becoming an expert, and then becoming an expert, you truly realize how little you know about that discipline. And that is the mark of intelligence. I think it was Socrates who said, "The only thing I know is that I know nothing." So, Think about this when you approach conversations, is we know such a small little piece of the information around us, but we can share that and we can grow that amongst ourselves, especially if we're able to establish true understanding. So, anyways, everyone, I'm going to cut it off here. This chapter went way longer than probably some of the other ones are going to go, so apologies for that. Or you're welcome if you like, the longer style content like this. I'll be continuing with the audiobook series, the commentary series, and I'm also going to add a reaction series where I'm going to be doing interviews with people who've read the book and having a conversation with them about the book, what they think about it, what they like, what they didn't like. So join me on my channel for all those things. And if you want to pick up a copy of the book, go into the description. If it's not in the description, it'll be in the pinned comment, and that'll have links to my social, my Amazon page with where you can purchase the book, and my Patreon and stuff like that if you want to support me. Anyways, guys, please like, share, and subscribe if you enjoyed the content, and I'll catch you later.